Hello everyone, welcome to History class. Today we are going to start Lesson 7 of History, British Policies and Their Impact. The main objectives of the lesson are you will come to know about Indian economy before the advent of the British revenue system, economy after the advent of the British, and effects of the British commercial policy. Topic of the day is the British revenue system and economy. The main objectives of today's topic are you will come to know about the Indian economy before the advent of the British revenue system, economy after the advent of the British, land revenue policy, permanent settlement, Ryotwari system, Mahalwari system, effects of the revenue collection system, and drain of wealth. But before starting today's topic, let us discuss the new words related to it. New words: capitalist, a person who invests his wealth in trade and industry for profit in accordance with principles of capitalism. Cash crops, the crops which are grown to sell in the market for profit. Industrial revolution, transition or change to new manufacturing processes from about 1760 to about 1820 and 1840. Revenue, a state's annual income from which state expenses are met. Mortgaged, to convey a property to a creditor as security on a loan. Tenant, a person who occupies land or property rented from a landlord. Ryot, an Indian peasant. Ijardari system. The Ijardari system was introduced by Warren Hastings. According to this system, the right to collect revenue was given to the highest bidder or contractor for a period of 5 years. Permanent settlement. Permanent settlement was introduced by Lord Cornwallis, and under this system, the land revenue was fixed permanently at a fixed amount. Handicraft industries, the industries in which things are made by hands without using machines. Ryotwari system. Ryotwari system was developed by Sir Thomas Monroe, and under this system, revenue assessment and collection was made directly between the British and Indian farmers. Absentee landlord, the merchants and traders who owned land in villages but lived in towns. Mahalwari system. Mahalwari system was devised by Holt Mackenzie. Under this system, the land was divided into mahals. Each mahal comprises of one or more villages. Ownership rights were vested with the farmers. Now let us discuss about the Indian economy before the advent of British. The Indian economy was highly based on agriculture, with 95% of population living in villages, and rest of the 5% lived in towns and cities. And those towns and cities were important centers of trade and industry, whereas the village community was based on a simple division of labor. There existed classes of people called farmers, weavers, goldsmiths, carpenters, potters, washermen, cobblers, etc. All these occupations were hereditary and passed by tradition from father to son. These craftsmen were paid a stipend or earnings out of the crops at the time of harvest in lieu of the services performed. And most of the food produced in the villages was consumed by the village population itself. The raw materials produced from the primary industries were the feed for handicrafts. Thus, the interdependence of agriculture and hand industry provided the basis of the small village republics to function independently of the outside world. So, the Indian villages were economically independent. Now, let us read from the book. The British domination of India brought about many changes in the administrative, cultural, social, educational, and economic setup of India. The British brought almost all the territories of India under their control during 1765 to 1857. They felt the need to administer them efficiently. For that, they made many changes and came up with the new policies on education, administration, culture, society, and economy. Let us take a look at the Indian economy before the advent of the British. Advent means arrival. The Indian economy at that time was mainly a rural economy with 95% of the population living in the villages. The remaining 5% lived in towns and cities. These towns and cities were important centers of trade, commerce, and industry. Means before the arrival of the British, most of the Indians were involved in agriculture and about 95% people lived in the villages and rest 5% people lived in towns and cities. During that time, the villagers of India were involved in agriculture or farming, whereas the trade was carried out in cities and towns. Thereafter, closely connected to these larger towns, villages also emerged as small units which were economically self sufficient. Means villages were considered as the small units and were very closely related to the cities and towns of India, and the villages had self-sufficient economy. The self-sufficient village economy refers to such kind of situation in which the village is equipped with all sort of facilities required by the people within it. It doesn't depend upon the neighboring villages or other places for its needs. Sustenance was guaranteed to the Indian villages due to the presence of the handicraft industries. Villages mainly thrived on these industries as their products served to fulfill the needs of the village community. The Indian villages depend and flourished due to the presence of the handicraft industries. Handicraft industries are the industries in which the things are made up by hands rather than using the machines, and many of the villagers fulfill their basic needs by depending on these handicraft industries. The handicraft industry mainly included potters, weavers, artisans, and craftspeople. In addition to this, agriculture being a significant means of livelihood, along with the handicraft industry, met the demands and needs of the village people. Means many of the Indian villagers were involved in the handicraft industries. Like some were expert in making the pots, while others were good at weaving the cloth, and many were skilled in making the things by hands, etc. And moreover, many of the Indian villagers were involved in agriculture or farming. So we can say that the Indian villagers entirely depend on handicraft industries and agriculture for their livelihood. This helped villages emerge as independent economic units as they did not have to depend on external means of survival. Means agriculture and handicraft industries helped the Indian villages to emerge as an independent economic units. No doubt the villages were considered as the smallest units, but they were economically independent as they didn't have to depend on the neighboring villages for their livelihood. The system of revenue collection existed at that time too. Revenue was collected by the government in kind and sometimes in cash. Means even before the arrival of the British in India, the system of revenue collection was there. And there was two types of revenue collection. First was the direct form in which the revenue collection was done by the officials of the rulers. And on the other hand, the collection of revenue was carried out in the indirect form through the zamindars or landlords. Now, let us read and discuss about the British revenue system 1765 till 1793. With the advent of the East India Company, cash payment became the only form of payment and revenue was fixed at a higher rate. Means with the arrival of the East India Company, the revenue was increased and the revenue was collected by the English East India Company in cash. Further, the signing of the Treaty of Allahabad with Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II allowed the company to collect revenue from Odisha, Bengal and Bihar. In 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad was signed. It was a treaty between Nawab of Awadh, Shujauddaulah, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, and Robert Clive. And as per the treaty, the English East India Company got the right to collect the revenue from the people of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. However, the system of revenue collection exploited the peasants. Means the British started treating the farmers unfairly in order to take benefit from their work. So we can say that the company was making efforts to increase the revenue as much as it could. Cash crops like cotton, indigo, and jute were grown widely due to the fixed mode of revenue payments. The decline in the growth of food crops like wheat and rice affected not only the peasants but the general population as well. Means farmers were allowed to grow only those crops which the company could sell in the market for its profit, and those crops included cotton, indigo, and jute. And even farmers were forced to sell the cash crops to the company at low prices. Peasants were unable to pay the dues that were being demanded from the company. So, the agricultural production of the food crops like wheat, rice, barley, pulses, etc., was in decline. So, by this, not only the farmers but the general population of the country suffered a lot. Famines, starvation, shortage of food, and prolonged hunger became rampant. Due to the scarcity of food crops like wheat, rice, pulses, barley, etc., there was a shortage of food, extreme hunger, and this situation remained for a long period of time due to the decline in the growth of food crops. The absence of irrigation methods at this time meant that farmers depended on monsoon for any form of agricultural production. There were no means of irrigation to water the crops. So, for watering the crops, the farmers entirely depended on the monsoons for their agriculture production. A failure of rain therefore led to further exploitation as the peasants were then forced to buy money from moneylenders who in turn charged the high rates of interest. Most of their land was seized by the moneylenders when they were unable to pay the interest. During that time, farmers were even more exploited. All the crops totally destroyed because there was neither rainfall nor any irrigation facilities. So the farmers were forced to take the money from the dealers, but the dealers in return took the benefit of the farmers and started charging the high rates of interest to them. The condition of the farmers worsened during that time as they were not able to pay the dues that were being demanded from them. So, the dealers started occupying the lands of the farmers. Under such circumstances, the Bengal famine of 1770 occurred. It was one of the most brutal forms of destruction that can be labeled as a predictable and unavoidable phenomenon. The famine wiped out one third of the total population. However, it also brought a major setback to the prevailing system of revenue collection. Already, the people were suffering a lot and the situation was worsened. And during that time, the Bengal famine of 1770 occurred. And the Bengal famine was usually attributed to the combination of weather and the policies of the British East India Company. The start of the famine had been attributed to a failed monsoon in 1769 that caused widespread drought, and the famine completely destroyed nearly one third of the population. And even then, no aid was provided by the company or by the Nawab of Bengal. And after such circumstances, great changes were made in the existing system of the revenue collection. Now let us discuss about the economy under the British rule. The Indian economy was a rural economy. Taxes were collected both in cash and kind by the zamindars, and the system of revenue collection exploited the peasants. The British required a large sum of money to maintain their elaborate administrative structure. It was also required to meet the war expenses and to buy Indian goods. Therefore, the British aimed at making as much money as possible. For that, the British devised an economic policy, and the land revenue was their main source of income at that time. They targeted it first, and the English East India Company introduced three new revenue collection systems over a period of time. These were the permanent settlement or zamindari system, the second was Ryotwari system, and the other one was Mahalwari system. Now let us read from the book. Land revenue system. Warren Hastings introduced the Ijardari system. In this system, the right to collect revenue was auctioned. This system aimed to offer the right to revenue collection to the highest bidder for a period of 5 years. During that time, Warren Hastings was the viceroy who was interested in the land revenue system of India. So he started bidding system in India, which included the highest bidder was given the collection right, and If he failed to collect land revenue, his right of collecting revenue will be auctioned. And this bidding system of Warren Hastings was known as Ijardari system. The highest bidder was given the collection right for the period of 5 years. However, being unsure of retaining the contract, the zamindars took no step towards any form of improvement of the land. So, in order to get the collection right, the people used to give bid of higher and higher amount, but it became unpractical to collect the land revenue same in entire India because the land differs in its fertility from one province to another. And even under this system, the zamindars were not sure that they would get the contract. So they didn't take any of the steps to improve the condition of land. Once again, peasants were driven around harsh measures to meet their revenue targets. Thus, this system proved to be nothing but unsuccessful as it increased depreciation both in the quality of the land and the lives of the poor peasants. So we can conclude that Ijardari system was not successful because of the two reasons. The first reason was that the farmers had to face lots of difficulties to meet their revenue targets. And secondly, the zamindars were not sure that whether they would get the contract or not, so they were not trying to improve the conditions of the land. And even the company was not sure about its land revenue. So the British wanted to introduce the fixed land revenue systems. Therefore, the company introduced three new revenue collection systems over a period of time. These were the permanent settlement, the Rayotwari system, and the Mahalwari system. Permanent settlement 1793. But before reading it from the book, let us discuss the main points. Lord Cornwallis introduced a revenue system in the states of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha known as the permanent settlement. This was a pact or treaty made with the zamindars who collected revenue from the peasants and handed over a fixed amount to the British. In 1793, Lord Cornwallis introduced the permanent settlement or zamindari bandobast in Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. The revenue to be collected was fixed permanently. It could not be revised later. The permanent settlement was also called the Zamindari Bandobast. It was introduced in Bengal, Odisha, Bihar by Lord Cornwallis in 1793, and under the permanent settlement, zamindars were considered as the owners of the land, and the amount of revenue that the zamindars had to pay was fixed, and it was decided that it won't be raised for the given period of time. The local zamindar was to collect revenue from the peasants. He had to make payments to the company on time. If he failed, his zamindari was auctioned. Means it was the duty of the local landowner to collect the taxes from the farmers, and the landowners had to pay a fixed amount of land revenue every year to the company, even if there were adverse conditions such as flood or drought. And in case if landowners failed to pay the land revenue on time, their land would be auctioned off. This led to the emergence of a new class of absentee landlords, that is, the merchants and traders who owned land in villages but lived in towns. They rose to become hereditary landowners from tax collectors. Means the permanent settlement resulted in the emergence of the absentee landlords. They started becoming the hereditary landowners from the tax collectors. So this system made sure that the absentee landowners obtained the hereditary rights over their land. The cultivators became their tenants. Tenants means the persons who occupied land or property rented from a landlord. Whatever remained with the zamindar after paying the revenue was his profit. So we can conclude that under the permanent settlement, the zamindars or the landowners were free to fix the rent, and the farmers under this system were reduced to the status of tenants. The land revenue was fixed at 50% of the total produce, and whatever remained to the landowner after paying the revenue to the company was the profit of the landowner. Now let us read and discuss about the other revenue system of the English East India Company, that was the Rayotwari system 1820. The Rayotwari system was introduced by Thomas Monroe in 1820, initially in Madras, the present day Chennai, Bombay, the present day Mumbai, and parts of Assam. Under this system, the ownership rights were handed over to the peasants or farmers. The British government collected taxes directly from the peasants. And the revenue rates of the Rayatwari system were 50%, where the lands were dry, and 60% in irrigated land. Rayatwari system. This system of revenue collection was introduced in Bombay and Madras presidencies. Presidencies means provinces. Under this, the revenue was directly collected from the cultivators. Cultivators means the farmers. The Rayot was recognized as the owner of the land. He paid tax directly to the government. But actually, the Rayotwari system was started by Alexander Reed in some of the areas that were taken over by the company after wars with the Tipu Sultan in the south. But later on, the Rayotwari system was improvised by Thomas Monroe in 1820, and it was initially started in Bombay and Madras, and after that, this system was gradually extended all over the South India. Under this system, the government directly collected the tax from the farmers, and the Indian farmer was considered as the owner of the land. However, the taxes were very high and the means of collection was rigid. Rigid means fixed. The revenue payable was roughly half of the total yield. Yield means produce. Under this system, the revenue was more and fixed. The farmers had to pay 50% even if their land is dry. And in case if their land is irrigated, they had to pay 60% of their revenue to the government. This system came to be known as the Monroe System as it was developed by Sir Thomas Monroe. It was introduced in all parts of South India. So we can conclude that the Rayatwari system is also known as the Monroe System as it was introduced by Sir Thomas Monroe initially in Madras and Bombay in the year 1820. But later on it was extended in all the parts of southern India. And under this system, the revenue was directly given to the government, but the revenue was so high that the farmers were unable to pay it. So the Indian farmers fled to the cities and the villages became deserted in many regions of India. Now let us read and discuss the other system of revenue collection of the British, that was Mahalwari System 1822. The Mahalwari system was introduced during the period of William Bentinck in Central Province, Northwest Frontier, Agra, Punjab, Gangetic Valley, etc. of the British India. And this system was introduced by Holt Mackenzie in 1822. Mahalwari system had many provisions of both the Zamindari system and Rayotwari system. Under Mahalwari system, the land was divided into mahals, and each mahal comprised one or more villages, and the ownership rights were vested with the peasants or farmers, and the village committee was held responsible for collection of the taxes. The Mahalwari system was introduced in Punjab, parts of Uttar Pradesh and central India. Mahal means a revenue estate. This may include a village or a group of villages. Means the Mahalwari system was introduced in 1822 and it was introduced in Punjab, parts of Uttar Pradesh and central India. And the word Mahalwari is derived from the Hindi word mahal, which means revenue estate or revenue property. Each mahal comprised of a village or a group of villages. This system was devised by Holt Mackenzie. Under this system, the land was inspected and measured. The customary rights of the different groups were recorded by the company officials. Means under the Mahalwari system, the collectors went from village to village for inspecting the land, measuring the fields, and then recording the customs and rights of the different groups. Accordingly, estimated revenue from each plot within a village was added to calculate the revenue of each mahal or village. means the estimated revenue of each plot within a village was added up to collect the revenue that each village or mahal had to pay. The talukdar or the head of the village collected the revenue. The rate of revenue was subjected to a periodic revision. It was roughly half of the total agricultural production. Means the charge of collecting the revenue and paying it to the company was given to the village headman or talukdar rather than the zamindar. And the rate of the revenue was to be revised periodically. That means it was not permanently fixed. And the revenue or tax was the half of the total agricultural production. Now, before discussing the next topic, let us recall these revenue collection systems of the English East India Company. The permanent settlement was introduced in Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. Rayotwari system was introduced in South India, and whereas Mahalwari system was introduced in Northwest India. Tax collected in the permanent settlement, the tax was collected by the zamindars, whereas in Rayotwari system, the tax was collected by the company directly. And in Mahalwari system, the tax was collected by village headman or talukdar. In the permanent settlement, the zamindars were the landowners, and in Rayotwari system, the farmers were the landowners, whereas in Mahalwari system, the landlords were the landowners. And the other features of these revenue collection systems were tax burden to farmers, high tax was imposed, and the tax was increased frequently. Now let us read and discuss about the effects of the revenue collection systems. Effects means influences. The condition of the farmers deteriorated. They were forced to sell their lands. The exploitative revenue policies and regular famines added to the sufferings of the peasants. There were many negative impacts on the Indians of these revenue collection systems. The condition of farmers became worse and they were forced to sell the lands. They were totally exploited by the revenue policies of the English East India Company. Moreover, regular famines led to the sorrows and sufferings of the farmers. The zamindars too were indifferent towards agriculture. They did nothing to improve agriculture. There were frequent agrarian riots. Land became a saleable commodity which could be bought, sold, or mortgaged. Mortgaged means girvi rakhna. Even the zamindars or landowners took no steps towards any form of improvement of the land. And because of these revenue collection systems, the land became a saleable thing, and there were often agricultural riots. And in case if the farmers were not able to pay the revenue on time, their land could be bought, sold, or even mortgaged. Now let us read and discuss about the cultivation of cash crops. Cultivation means growing, and cash crops means the crops which were grown by the farmers to be sold in the market for earning the profit. Industrial revolution increased the demand for the commercial or cash crops. Industrial revolution means the process of change from an agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing. And this process began in Britain in the 18th century and from there spread to other parts of the world. And the Industrial Revolution increased the demand of the cash crops in India. Thus, Indian farmers were forced to cultivate cash crops to fulfill the rising demand. So there was a great impact of Industrial Revolution on Indians. The Indian farmers were forced to produce cotton plantation so that it can fuel English factories as India was then under the British rule. Secondly, the Industrial Revolution brought severe consequences to society. The farmers were forced to grow cash crops in place of the food crops. And the cash crops like tea, coffee, indigo, jute, oil seeds, sugarcane, mulberry, and rubber were in huge demand. Now, the next topic is drain of wealth. Drain of wealth was the constant flow of national wealth from India to England, for which India did not get any adequate economic, commercial, or material return. Drain of wealth means the continuous flow of wealth from India to England. The British exploitation of Indian economy led to this drain of wealth in different forms. Actually, the British came to India in search of raw materials. They saw that India was full of wealth of raw materials. They thought India as a resource of wealth and drain away all the resources from India to their country to improve their economic industries. The British started exploiting the Indian economy, and which resulted to the drain of wealth in different forms. Dadabhai Nauroji wrote a book titled Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, which gives a clear picture of the drain of wealth from India to England. Dadabhai Nauroji, known as the Grand Old Man of India, was a Parsi intellectual, educator, and an early Indian political and social leader. Drain of wealth was first of all criticized by Dadabhai Nauroji in his book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. The main theme of this book is drain of wealth. In his book, he had mentioned that the raw materials like jute, cotton, tea, coffee, and indigo were used for the industries in England, and even the salaries of the British officers were paid from the money generated by the Indian revenue, and these salaries were deposited in England. Moreover, the money received as the gifts and bribes were sent to England, and the revenue of the country was used to purchase goods by the British, which were then sent to England. So we can conclude that the British policies had negative impact on India as they brought many changes in the administrative, cultural, social, educational and economic setup of India. Now, I hope today's topic is clear to you. Your today's homework is to learn the related terms and try to solve the related back exercises.